Hey guys, welcome back. BDCKR here. We're back with our weekly P&Q&C&A&T video. This is season 6, episode
PCAT
4. Right off the PCAT. That's right. That's a good way of shortening it. Right off the top, we're going to mention that you can listen to this on major RSS feeds as a podcast now. We're going to have information in the description, and if you look at that feed, you'll also be able to see over an hour, or listen to, not see, actually pretty explicitly, over an hour of new content that is not going to be up anywhere else, a bonus episode of our P&Q&C&A&T videos. Right. But also, something else that we're going to start off with, which isn't a question, it's an addendum of talking to our previous teeing about privacy in last week's episode, because we got kind of in the weeds. We got a little bit turned around and didn't actually make our way back around to our initial
That's
point.
cool. I like the weeds because, caught in the bramble. Bit of a mess. So I realized afterwards, soon afterwards, that I really totally forgot to follow the original point I was making about privacy, right? I started rambling about, toxicity, or the potential toxicity of social media. And I never brought it back to the point I was trying to make about being careful. So it's not exactly a privacy issue, but it's sort of adjacent. Because at the time, you were young enough that I thought the fewer personal details that people had about us, that there would be fewer vulnerabilities that people, if they chose to attack you, would have access to. And so, when you're younger, I didn't want to take the chance that the negativity of having a YouTube channel could hurt you or spoil it for you.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's actually a good thing to do.
Well, it's the funny thing is, okay, so knowing you and knowing who you are from a long, long time ago, I probably didn't need to worry. Because, all right, so can I tell the soother story?
Yeah, you can. This is for the viewers' benefit. You pre-cleared the story with me beforehand, which I do appreciate. Instead of putting me on the spot,
I gotta check on you again too, just to make sure you haven't changed your mind if we're gonna be in the moment.
Yeah, that's true. I still agree with it. Yeah, because I think it would have been a little bit bad for you to be like, "Can I tell a story?" Then me to be like, "No," and then people would have, anybody actually invested in this would have been a little curious.
So I don't know if it's a Canadian colloquialism. Is that colloquialism? One of those slang terms? So it's the same as a pacifier. It's one of those things that little babies suck on so that they don't cry. And they don't actually pay off except for the sensation of sucking, right? It's basically...
Well, really, babies of any size. They don't have to be little.
So when you were little, and when I say little, I mean preschool. And do you remember this even? Or is it only as a story?
No, I don't remember this story at all. I remember it as a story, but even as a story, you when you primed me on it beforehand, I was like, oh yeah, I remember you telling that, but I have no recollection at all of the original insight.
In North America, or at least in Canada, there's junior kindergarten, senior kindergarten, and then grade 1. Grade 1 is when you are, I believe, about 6. Senior K is about 5. Junior K is about 3. So there's preschool. And so that's a chance to socialize with other kids where there's no pressure. It's not like you have to actually learn anything. So you were in preschool. So you would have been maybe about 2.5, just under. So you were a little bit verbal, but not a lot. And you had your soother. And culturally, I think a lot of people have this thing where somehow at a certain age, you have to stop using your soothers or it's somehow bad. And I think a lot of kids are taught that, especially when they start interacting with other kids, or when parents want to stop giving them a soother, they'll tell them the soothers are for babies. And
yeah, it's the sort of appealing to them wanting to be grown up.
So the first day that you went to preschool, and remember, you were tiny, some kid walks up to you and says, "Soothers are for babies." And you pulled that soother out of your mouth, looked at him and said, "This is a big boy soother," and popped it right back in your mouth.
I think that's a good story, and it's only now that I'm hearing it that the question is occurring to me, where did you hear this from?
Well, this was because your mom had dropped you off at school. This was that was before you left. She always waited around a little bit to make sure you'd adjusted to the moment, and so she was there to hear it. And so I wasn't at that there as witness.
Oh, that makes sense. That's understandable. That's because I was like, was there just some sort of monitoring going on? But
no, because I still had to go. By the time you were ready for preschool, I was still going to work, right? So I did not get. I would have loved to have witnessed this, but having heard that story, I mean, I love that story, and I guess that speaks to the fact that I think from a relatively early age, you're pretty sure of yourself. But I mean, we still, just because you are good doesn't mean we have to take that for granted, right?
Yeah, that's true. I've actually been reading in my psychology textbooks interesting stuff about how personality is affected as you grow and how it actually remains relatively static. So which is interesting stuff. This is not super related, but this is just a fun fact. So personality obviously changes as you grow up, but one thing that's really interesting is that people's personalities tend to shift in a lot of the same ways. Like, for example, you tend to become more conscientious when you have kids. And so what ends up happening is, although people's personalities shift and they tend to trend to more and more kind of what people consider positive characteristics later in life, which is good, you tend to stay in approximately the same rankings among your peers and cohorts, because
it's like grading on the bell curve.
So you tend to be getting better if you start off being very conscientious. You tend to end up being very, like, even more conscientious, but how you rank relative to other people tends to actually be relatively static.
Okay.
Not always. Obviously, there's ways to move up and down, but
change your rank. It's like multiplayer online.
Yeah. And, you know, some of those things happen, especially surrounding really significant events, like trauma or something like that. But generally, you stay about, you know, in the same relative standing as your peers for different personality
Okay, but that's
traits.
the same point I've made before. I think about learning, maybe not on the podcast, but with you, where I've said that when you're young, it doesn't take a lot to change your perspective on stuff. But as you get older, it takes a much more significant event to sort of not change your mind, but change somebody's perspective. Yeah. All right, that's kind of cool.
Yeah, that's I thought it was very interesting. So it was only kind of tangentially related, but if you're talking about looking back to see aspects of my personality that you'd expect to be relatively static, I mean, there you go. And
listen, you stopped using it eventually. I mean, it's like a lot of other things like toilet training and stuff. I mean, some people put a really high priority on it and doing it at a certain time and doing it early, and you know, I mean, I never met any kids in university who were still using their soother and still wearing diapers. So I thought, at some point you're going to figure it out. And there's no point stressing all of us trying to make it happen earlier than it needed to.
That's true. I guess that would be speaking to Sigmund Freud's theories of fixation, that you have to do stuff at certain stages and you have to do it the right way, because if you get either too much or too little of whatever the necessary behavior is, or whatever kind of self-control you need to gain, that it'll come back to bite you later in life in a different way. But his theories also have a lot of like really gross kind of sexuality applied to like very, very small children. So maybe
Freud was wrong.
You take that with a grain of salt too.
Maybe Freud was wrong.
Well, I mean, he's got proponents, but his theories are to I think the best way I could put it is a little icky at times.
Okay. Yeah.
Just a little gross.
No kidding. There was a second follow-up too. Frolic Fox had a question about getting 200% on the slider minigame for Arkham Origins Deathstroke Special 1. And I want to point out, because we're seeing some of these fights, so whoever's watching might notice that Injustice 2 Aquaman on our current Justice League team has the same slider targeting on his Special 1. And you might also notice that we don't often try to get it to 100%. And that's because when you have the right special, like...
Or you mean 200%.
Right, yeah, exactly.
You don't get it to full.
So he's got bleeding damage over time. So it's often just as effective to stack them. So, for example, he comes in, new 52 Wonder Woman is given him 3 bars. He's got 3 special ones. Then you want to get them done as fast as possible so you can have them all 3 working at the same time, so you can get 60%. If you wait too long, the first one runs out. And that 60% extra damage means the bleed does more damage, but if we can get New 52 Wonder Woman back in quickly enough, she's doing an extra 60% for some hits of her special too.
Which is significant.
Yeah.
That's a big damage boost. That's in like the range of like a gear.
Right. So
kind of
it's better. Like some gears give you like a 15 or 20% boost to special 1 or special 2. This is 60%. So it's not like the time it takes us to hope that it lands unblocked or to aim it for special for the middle of the target, totally not worth it. damaged over time. That's why it's such a great special.
So there we go. That's just recapping our previous video with a little bit some extra
and
additions.
Maybe I just want to say this too, a small personal note. I've had a minor injury, so you might notice this in the fighting that it's not nearly as good. So I'm right-handed. I have ruptured the extensor tendon on my right middle finger, which means that, or functionally what that means is that I cannot straighten out the tip of my finger no matter how hard I try. So I've got a splint on my finger that I have to wear constantly for the next 6 weeks. If I let it bend a little bit, then the tendon doesn't heal. And if I let it bend even a moment, I have to restart the count at 6 weeks, because basically it means I've torn it open again and I have to give it 6 weeks to heal properly together. So the gameplay, besides the freezing that we're seeing a lot of, it's not up to my usual standards. And clearly the splint gets in the way of touches. And I didn't realize this. I rely on my second finger, or my middle finger, way more than... oh, what the hell's wrong with the game? So what it means...
Maybe a new phone
is in order, but I think it's probably because the fights are lasting so much longer that the phone is overheating faster, and it means that there's more likely... I mean, we already saw it drop once and we had to restart the fight, so maybe how we tie this back in, I guess, to the video is that we're not going to be able to end it on exactly 3 ultimates. I think we're probably going to have to end it in the middle of a fight, or at the end of one fight, but in the middle of a ladder, because I don't think we can justify trying to finish 3 ladders for how much longer it's going to take me to do.
And this is also a great opportunity to listen in on the podcast, because there's not going to be as much to look at this time.
That's true. Oh, and maybe this is a time to plug the little sneak previews that we've got at the end of the videos, because there's going to be something at the end of this video, like the last couple, where it's going to just point out exactly how the timing was just wrong and just a little bit right, where there's something that we're showing in it that I actually won't be able to do for another 6 weeks.
That's true. This is also... Wow, we're really having some trouble here, huh? This is also an opportunity for me to say a small personal note, which is that I've been studying for my psych textbook a lot, so if I keep bringing up stuff, that's why, and I'm sorry if you aren't interested in first-year university-level psych. I'll try to keep it to a minimum, but I've got a lot of facts and figures floating around.
Actually, I never took psych. Everything you're saying is kind of new to me, so I'm really interested in it. And you know what's cool is that it's supposed to be a sign of intelligence, where you're able to connect ideas and bring them together, not just regurgitate them, but actually find connections between them.
Well, that's
a good sign. It means your tuition's not getting wasted, right?
I mean, I would hope not. Yeah. And I think the fact that I'm studying is also not an awful sign. Yeah. Ideally, trying to do my best before the attrition.
Right, so I think this might be the record for the longest it's taken us to get to the first question.
Oh wow, yeah. 13 minutes. No biggie. Okay, our first question comes from Max Ramos, and they say, wait, you've shown us your roommates or brothers, no? Like the lifting weights thing?
So this is related to maybe a point where we were just talking about being father and son.
That's true. We mentioned it just earlier with the soother story.
And this season is the season. I mean, we've actually met, for people who've been watching us for a while, I mentioned it before once when we were reviewing Neil Gaiman's book.
Yeah, what book was it? Was it the Graveyard
No,
book?
it was a book of essays. I can't remember the title right now, but it was really good. Yeah. And there was something that just hit me kind of hard.
I remember what you said about it too.
Yeah. All right. So people can go back to watch that if they want. But it's our review videos tend to have a lot smaller numbers. So there were always definitely a few people who knew that. But we've sort of been more open with it because, like I said, as you've gotten older, I felt less, not protective, but less worried that you needed the protection.
Yeah, more confident that I'm able to actually handle my own online privacy, because at this point, if I'm not, then I'm kind of screwed whether or not we're doing it here or not anyways.
So the question is interesting to me, not because of the question itself and the answer. It's tangentially kind of related reasons, right? Because I know for a fact we have never said we were roommates or brothers.
Yeah, and it's easy to know that because that would be lying, and we just explicitly didn't share the information instead of outright
I've really only avoided saying how we're connected. There was a conscious decision not to lie, and the thing that makes me think of this is, or the idea that I'm connected to. Look, it's saying stuff, and there's nothing on the screen.
Look at that.
Oh,
constantly connecting ideas.
Okay, did you see that though? Like, see the lag? The audio was there, but the video was delayed. It didn't start the game. You didn't get to see the beginning. Anyways, sorry.
Probably very frustrating.
It was very frustrating to play. It's like when I'm watching a show or reading a book or consuming any kind of media. I don't always remember the details, but I have a really strong memory for how I feel when I'm in that moment. And I know I would have felt really weird about lying, especially when it's not necessary. And all right, so this speaks to me a little bit about how people will sometimes make assumptions and fill in details where there are none. And very commonly, people do this when they assume that other people are like you.
Oh God, this is also from my first year.
Okay,
psych.
so unless they give you reasons to think otherwise, right? There might be specific things that stand out.
Yeah.
But, like, it's just that you assume that you make sort of assumptions about how what you're reading about or seeing is like you, right?
Yeah. This is interesting. Yeah, because this is totally from my psych. That's called it's a projective test that people can use to try to figure out people's internal mental state. So the other projective tests are things like Rorschach tests, or I forget what the term is, but it's the one where they show you pictures and they ask you to tell a story. So they have like a generally ambiguous photo, maybe of like two people in a certain position, and they ask you to tell stories and the emotions that you ascribe to the characters in the story. And those generally aren't good tests, but what a slightly better version of the same test is to just look at generally how people perceive others as, generally good, generally whatever. And so there's something called Machiavellian tendencies. I'm sure most people have heard of it. That's like a kind of common phrase, right? Machiavellianism, which is just kind of evil. But more than that, it's
is that calculated. Yeah, I thought it was more just that it was the ability to detach yourself enough to try to get the kind of reactions that you want by doing the things that'll get you there.
Yeah, it's specifically meant to be manipulative.
Okay, yeah, that's right. Okay.
Yeah, because Machiavelli wrote a guide basically on how to be successful as a ruler, and it was really kind of cold, and it was talking about like how to like quell like revolution and stuff, and how to like do like whatever you needed, how it's like better to be feared than loved, kind of thing.
Can I give a plug now? Moment. Ada Palmer.
Yeah, okay.
Ada Palmer. She wrote a bunch of science fiction books. She's a history professor at University of Chicago. We met her recently, actually, at Joe Walton's convention. I just want to point out, she had a great post on her blog, on her website, Exurbe, Exurbe, totally about Machiavelli. So if anybody's interested in that, you should read that, actually.
But so one of the interesting things is that people who are like that tend to ascribe that same sort of sense of calculating and kind of detachment from emotion to other people, and they use that as justification for why they're doing it. So they're doing it because that's what everybody else is doing, and that's the only way to get ahead, and that's actually how the game is supposed to be played, and not that they are kind of manipulating or taking advantage. It's interesting.
So that's the same idea that where people who have zero empathy complain that other people are virtue signaling. So that phrase to me is loaded because it sort of implies that the person who's using it thinks that somehow people can't actually really care about something, that they're only doing it to sort of pretend they are, to signal to other people that, well, hey, listen, I've got this virtue.
Yeah, or at least they're talking about the person in question isn't obviously believing in it. I think it's a term that theoretically would be useful if it hadn't been sort of poisoned just by the way that it was used consistently. Right? I think it's something that definitely has the potential to be true, because I think it happens. I would be very kind of wary of actually using it just because of the way,
because of connotations
been
tainted.
So, but there's been poisoned. It's the thing, if you hear somebody say it, even if they're right, you probably think they're a little bit of a dink, or at least that's how I feel
exactly
about it.
There's another version of it that I've seen that isn't sort of corrupted the same way. I think if they call it performative. So that's probably maybe less, like you said, tainted, whatever. Like I hear that, I don't get the same kind of gut reaction thing. Oh, what a dink.
Yeah, because virtual signaling is a great turn of phrase, right? And it really gets across what it's meant to. It's just not its connotations, as opposed to just its strict denotation.
The people who've co-opted the phrase, basically.
Yeah, or did they co-opt it or did they start it? I don't know the origin of the phrase. It's entirely possible that they created it and it was just never used well, but it just happened to be descriptive of a real phenomenon.
No, that makes a lot of sense. What was the original point? The original point. Oh. So talking about like media, right? But more so in books because you don't actually get to see people, right?
Oh, like filling in the blanks, making people, like assuming people.
Right. So
like
if the characters aren't described specifically in a way to tell you, most people assume things about how they look, and I mean, a lot of times it's to assume they're like you, but almost as much. For example, even if you're not white, but you grow up in a predominantly white culture, the default is white. So a lot of people who maybe people of color reading a book about a character will fill in the blanks and assume that they are white.
Yeah. That's not the white thing specifically, but like putting yourself in the character is that's a purposeful choice that they make in a lot of YA like books that have at least some romance component that tend to be directed at young women or girls, right? They in a lot of those books they actually tend to be pretty vague about how the female lead looks, and it's almost like a joke that the female lead doesn't actually even really look like anything based off of the description, because it's just meant, and they also don't have much of a personality, and both of those things are so that they don't sort of conflict too much with somebody being able to put themselves into that character.
More connections, like a Ditto in Pokemon.
Yeah, so it's like the dude is always described really like specifically and as like really like hot and like intelligent and like just a bunch of desirable traits, and then the girl is kind of just sort of this like blank slate that doesn't really have much of a personality.
There's a word for that. Cipher. Right? All right, that's interesting. See, I don't have enough experience reading young adult novels or romance to really comment on that, but that's an interesting take. I'm curious.
Here's the thing. I also don't have enough experience reading young adult romance novels directed primarily at young women. That is, I think, a secondary source that I'm just parroting the views of, and it is very possible that it's wrong, and I would suggest to anybody who disagrees to find their own source on that, and also to disregard everything I just said. But it sounds like it could be right.
All right, yeah.
You know what I mean?
It has that ring of truth, whether it's true or not. I'm interested enough. I think I might want to try to look that up before the next time we're doing this.
I think the example that I saw specifically talked a lot about Twilight and Bella, if I remember correctly. But if I don't remember correctly, I am saying completely incorrect things. So let's hope I did remember.
Okay, I'm gonna try to bring it back to the original point again. So that's all right to me. All right, so Ursula Le Guin. That's why the whole idea of assuming the whiteness, it was such a big deal to me reading Ursula Le Guin's Earthsea trilogy, which is not a trilogy anymore. It's like 5. I mean, 4 is tetralogy, but I don't know what 5 is. Ged, the Archmage, Ged was brown. And it was clearly brown. She described him like that, and it was kind of cool. And it brings me,
that's really
and because
cool.
you remember that, right? You remember Wizard of Earthsea.
Yeah.
I remember it because I think you were about 8
do.
when I read that to you first. And I'm not going to spoil it for anybody, but there was a real interesting twist at the end that you got before we got there.
I do remember that. Yeah, I'm glad that you said it, because I think it would have sounded very kind of self-congratulatory if I said that was the reason why I remember.
It was pretty cool. But see, then the adjacent question is, why does representation matter? So why does it matter that he's brown? And my feeling is that there's this idea that I believe very strongly that there is a strength in stories. I mean, seeing people who have problems and struggles that are not exactly the same, but similar to ours, and then overcoming them. I think there's a power in there and a strength that we can draw from, and that you can't really teach people to be strong, but you can, they can learn to be stronger.
Yeah, and I think even if you're white, it's harder to find what it feels like to not be represented. But I think you can probably find a piece of media that is obviously of and for a different culture. And you can watch it and see and feel a little bit of how this is obviously not meant for you. And I don't think that, you know, all media has to be like that just because there's white protagonists, but I think you definitely fall into that a little bit more. I think that's just one more kind of check mark in things that can make somebody feel like the media that they're watching isn't really meant for them. Because I think there's definitely, and it doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. There's a lot of stuff that I've enjoyed where I felt like I've just been missing maybe a little bit of the requisite knowledge to have it fully meant for me. Like I feel like Jane the Virgin, I love the show. If I knew more about telenovelas, I feel like I would like it more. But it's just, that's not part of the, you know, specific media I've consumed. But more than that, I think telenovelas as a genre are kind of a separate cultural experience.
See, that's why I think something like Jane the Virgin is so successful and just so cool, is because if you put enough in it, that there's stuff there for different people, but also for different viewings. So like an example is that when you read a book and you can come back to it, is that different stages in your life, you bring something different to it and you get something different out of it.
Yeah, and I should be clear, Jane the Virgin is like not, I think, a very strong example of this, and especially because, you know, on a fundamental, like I think they do such a good job that it almost doesn't even matter. But you can, I think you can still feel around the edges a little bit how it doesn't feel quite tailored for just me and my media consumption, but a little more than that, maybe a little bit of my culture too.
And I want to also make the point, it's possible to have empathy and identify with the struggles of someone who may not look like us, but who has struggles.
I think that's actually very important.
That have similarities, because I don't want to be saying that somehow you need to have people that look like you, right? But there's a bit more work involved in making that jump. More work than if, you know, you're from a similar background. And then there's basically the shortcuts and the shorthand, so that certain things will represent certain things, right? That are obvious, the connection, and they don't have to be stated. But if you come from a different culture, then it might go right over your head, right? So it's the same way the friends that I have, it's easier sometimes when they come from a similar cultural background, or maybe a similar financial situation, or the same stage of life, right? So stage of life is probably biggest, right? Friends who have kids going off to school, kids going to preschool or university now, like that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, I guess because there's kind of things that are known and constant and able to be taken for granted as similarities.
Right. So I wonder sometimes too, like this has occurred to me, that maybe there's potentially times where when you start identifying too strongly with people who aren't like you, more so than people who are, that it's good because it means that we're kind of getting along better, but it's also a little bit dangerous because that's how I think people internalize racism or sexism, when you buy into ideas that are harmful to yourself, because that's a story that you've lived with when you were growing up.
That's true. There's the good and the bad components of, I think, almost any group, and that's not to say in aggregate, because that's where you just get into stereotypes again. But I think there's a lot of kind of specific examples of certain kind of negative aspects of, and often not inherent to any group, but like with any sort of cultural grouping, people tend to not be perfect, and people tend to share kind of some of the similarities of imperfections based off of the environment that they're in.
Yeah, and you know what's sad? I mean, it took me a while to actually figure this out. Like, there's certain things that I think speak to this, where there's sort of systemic biases that I never really understood, but I get it more. So here's a good example. So the marks that you get in school, right? They are used as criteria as part of your CV to help you get into like the right university or get a good job, right? And there's some really kind of hard baked in assumptions about whether marks actually accurately affect your ability to perform wherever you're applying for, right? Because they don't.
That's true.
Because they're a surrogate. The only, when you get hired for a job, they don't actually care what your marks are. What they really care is how well you're going to do this job and how much of a dick are you going to be to other people. Like, are you going to get along with everybody else? And so they look at markers that tend to be influenced more than we'd like by the household you grew up in, what opportunities you had to go to school, what your neighborhood school was like.
Yeah. Oh, and I think you brought into some of the same stuff when you look at people, even interviews when the job doesn't actually require kind of speaking skills, where obviously certain aspects of being social and being able to get along with people are important, but people with developmental disabilities who might have trouble with speech oftentimes have a really kind of a much higher barrier to entry for certain jobs, just because no matter how well they could do the job, you have to do an interview
right, even
first,
if speech doesn't matter.
Even if speech doesn't matter at all to the job, you need to be able to do an interview. So people who can get anxiety in those situations, or people who have for any number of reasons difficulty with the interview environment, even though they wouldn't have difficulty with the job environment, have those same kinds of issues. Although that's a little bit different, because I mean, often it is kind of baked in something that you can't help. It's a trait of you as a person that is static, or at least partially static. So it's not exactly the same as discrimination based off of socioeconomic status or race, but I think it is a similar thing.
And we see lots of examples where in one way it looks really obvious, and another way it doesn't. So for example, affirmative action, I always have trouble remembering the phrase. So affirmative action is where there's sort of a quota for underrepresented minorities, but and so that seems like an obvious thing, and the pushback on that is always, well, isn't that reverse racism? Which is kind of a weird thing anyways, because racism is systemic, right? But these same people have no problems with legacy admissions to universities,
which are much higher numbers than affirmative actions.
Right. So legacy, I mean, if it's not obvious, I mean, we don't really have that, I think, in Canada, but it's big in the States, and we're neighbors, and so we're sort of aware of what's going on with our neighbors. But
yeah, and I think it's important to note that there are actually some systemic issues with affirmative action. I did a project on it, but those issues that people will point to, which bring up genuine good points for the issues with the current system, aren't critiques of affirmative action in general, and there's always better ways to do it. And I think in the case of stuff like affirmative action, it is valuable too.
More just it's the execution, not the theory.
Like a lot of when you have a seminar that it's not just affirmative action. When you talk about just looking to move towards equality and equity, there's a lot of ways that make people feel like you're forcing it, and people tend to actually dig in harder on their own beliefs when you do that. So for example, when you have education seminars that are mandatory, when people need to learn how to not be racist, when they're mandatory, people actually push back. When they're optional but encouraged, there's much better results, even though obviously it's not getting to everybody, and it may not be getting to the people who aren't going. But like when you're forced to do it, people tend to be like, oh, well, I'm not a racist, or they saying I'm a racist, and then they kind of grumble and they go, oh, well, if there weren't so many people of insert ethnic minority here trying to apply to this job, then it wouldn't even matter, right? Or maybe not exactly that, because that's obviously a pretty simplified version of events, and I think people are more complex than that. But they actually tend to push back. But then when you have people go and you encourage them to go, they say, hey, I'm going because I'm trying to be better, not because I already am bad, right? It feels more accusatory when somebody's forced to go, and it feels more like somebody's taking an opportunity to make sure they're being as good as they can be when they are allowed and encouraged to go.
And this is almost a little bit embarrassing, because an adjacent point is it took me years to figure out the difference between equality and equity, and the way it's used, right? So that equality is basically the idea that everybody gets the same thing no matter what, and equity is,
it's like communism,
which is not great, especially when it's a totalitarian kind of communism. But
true, like it feels a little forced.
Whereas equity is the idea that the people who need the help for whatever thing it is, they get the help. It's not something that you give to everybody. It's the people who need a little bit of a boost. They're the ones that get the boost.
it's trying to bring everybody up to the same quality of life as opposed to just giving everybody the same
Right.
tools, right? Like, it's not just giving everybody a wrench when not everybody wants to
Yeah,
be a mechanic.
I don't need a cast, or I don't need a hammer. I need a splint on my finger, right? You can give me lots of stuff, but this is actually what I need. This is what I'm going to take.
Yeah, where a quality is sometimes noble, and it's often better than nothing. If you go into the doctor's office and they give you some pain pills and also a cast and also some other stuff, maybe the pain pills will help more than not having enough money and getting nothing. But it would also be better if they saw you individually and just gave you what you specifically needed, instead of kind of giving you a box of loose medical supplies and kicking
Right, exactly. That would be funny. You know what? I mean, this is such a fertile ground for discussion. But
That's
I want
true. Where I think the longer we make videos, the more we're belying our kind of social stances, which I don't think is a bad thing, because hopefully the people who agree with us will continue watching, and the people who disagree with us will either maybe sit and listen to what we have to say, or
maybe they'll
leave.
skip ahead, they'll scrub ahead to the end so they at least catch the part where I'm doing something that I won't be able to do for 6 weeks because I've hurt myself, which is actually, it was still kind of cool.
That's true. That's true. And I know there's some people who listen who disagree with the points that we have, but they come back and they actually hear what we have to say and try to have discussions with us. And whether or not we end up agreeing with them, I think there's a valuable conversation to be had there, and I actually do appreciate that.
Totally agreed. All right, so probably not a secret that I make sort of little notes of things that I want to cover. There's just one other thing that I had wanted to say, was that the biggest problem with when people hire and they complain about quotas or whatever is that one of the criteria that's used to hire people often is higher education. And the biggest issue I have with that, as somebody who has gone on to professional schooling, so I've done university and a higher level than that, is that higher education, having the experience of it and meeting a lot of people who do it, higher education has a really low threshold for success. The required ability and the intelligence is actually low. It has so much more to do with persistence, but also opportunities, which is the time and money.
Yeah, so some of the things that it's measuring, baseline intelligence to be able to get in, and the persistence is valuable, but the time and money means that if you only look at that, you're locking other people out who would be just as good as somebody else, but missing some of the opportunities.
And I want to point out, though, when you mention baseline intelligence and persistence, the amount of each, I think, is really low. I mean, I've met a lot of people in university, and it doesn't take a lot of intelligence, and the amount of persistence it takes is actually not nearly as much as you'd think, unless you have something that requires your time, like outside of your circumstances. If you need to work to survive, if you can't afford to study and work enough hours to pay for it, like, sticking with it is kind of, outside of really big life circumstances, for people who are privileged enough to have a little bit of support from their parents, that is easy. I've always respected and what always amazed me were the people who really did it on their own with no safety net and were able to pay for their tuition and someplace to live on the time that going to school allowed them.
And I think we might have to agree to disagree a little bit about talking about the persistence and intelligence necessary being low. I think there's a lot of people who are generally smart and who are trying pretty hard, who definitely still struggle in university for one reason or another, or university, college, any type of higher education. And I think each case is different, but I think some people might balk a little bit at the sort of way that you're describing.
Oh, okay, so maybe then I'm coming across wrong, because to me it seems like it's obvious. The part is that to me, success is graduating with a degree. Not doing really great or whatever, or honors roll or dean's list or whatever. It's that you finish with a degree. You don't have to be really, really smart. Most people who put in the time will get through it. And when you're in the life stage where you have the opportunity, you don't have a lot of responsibilities. I'm not talking about people who have other responsibilities or other stresses in their life, that make it difficult for them to spend a big chunk of their day going to classes and studying. So this I'm not talking about the people who maybe have a kid, who are raising a kid on their own, who maybe have a family to support, who have sick family members, who don't speak the language, right? Where they're attending university, where like other stuff that's not that easy. Like I guess I'm falling into the same trap of making assumptions that people who are like us, where you know, even if you don't get along with your parents, at least they're supporting you a little bit. The people who don't have the support of the parents, who were kicked out of their house, who are literally supporting themselves, they're working a job that would be able to support them totally, and then spending their spare time going to school, that to me is the exception. And so when you talk about the kind of degrees that people get, I think what you've selected out for, if you use that as a criteria, are the people who actually had more difficult circumstances that would have allowed them to demonstrate better their ability to handle difficult situations and stresses, the same kind that you might have at your job that you're trying to hire for. Does that make more sense?
I think we'll still have to agree to disagree a bit, because I think there's a lot of reasons why, for one reason or another, you know, depending on program, a lot of different things, people could have a lot of struggle even kind of staying afloat to some extent. And I mean, sometimes that is just behaviors and habits that they've learned and is really hard to unlearn. But I think getting to this stage while not having formed those habits makes sense. And also people who just, you know, have to put in a little bit more time and effort to get the desired result. So I think to that point, there are a lot of people who definitely do struggle in university outside of those situations, who are still making, I think, significant effort to succeed, and who are more than smart enough to deserve to be
I
here.
think that's I totally think that's fair. I can agree with that. I can get for that.
Okay, so there we go. Yeah, I think we're just getting a middle ground. I just want to make sure that we don't make anybody feel bad.
Oh, unnecessarily, right? Like I want bad people to feel bad. I don't want good people to feel bad. Is basically it.
Yeah, I think a lot of people can end up running into some challenges for one reason or another in university that make things a little bit more difficult. Or I'd say university just because I'm Canadian. College, I guess we should be talking to our largest audience, which is the U.S.
Yeah, that's true. So yeah, I don't want to make it, because I know lots of people, I think, who do struggle. I guess I feel like I'm maybe not unpacking the different things properly to get my idea across. So I for that I do apologize. Yeah.
Well, there we go. I think that's enough hand-wringing, maybe. So shall we move on to our next question? Comes from Ian Donegan, and they say, "Hey guys, another interesting episode. My son wants me to do a YouTube channel with him now, mostly about Lego. Anyway, do you think they will ever add more characters to the breakthrough part of the game? I've got a spare 3 cars of pretty much most people now. Also, with the success of the Aquaman film, I'm hoping for a couple new skins. Really, and if the Injustice team are really nice to us, I'd love to see Black Manta." And then we asked a question about his son, and he followed up. BDCKR Gaming, my son is 13, but has learning difficulties. He has a YouTube channel where he uploads Lego videos. They aren't too bad. He really enjoys making them, but we keep his identity hidden as we want to keep him safe, which is great because this ties into kind of some of the stuff that we were talking about earlier.
And what's funny is, that's about, you were maybe a little bit younger than that when we started doing these videos.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's definitely a really interesting opportunity. I think, coming from the kid's perspective, the important stuff is to have expectations, and to help him set expectations for what the channel is and isn't going to be, and just make sure that he's doing it for the right reasons, which is that he's going to enjoy it, and really that's it. It's a fun hobby, and he just wants to be able to, you know, make something and put it up online, and kind of that sort of performative aspect that I think it does make you think differently about the thing that you're doing when you're making the content.
Right, that awareness of an audience.
Yeah. And I think sometimes that's more important than the audience actually being there. And so if it's just like he sees other people making YouTube videos and he thinks it would be fun and he wants to do it, I think that's great. And I think YouTube is actually a great opportunity for kids nowadays to be like the people they watch and look up to. It has a certain accessibility, but I think it's important maybe to avoid disappointment. And if this is the kind of you'll have to tell with your kid, because I think like a lot of kids make YouTube channels and nobody ever watches it and they don't mind and they just kind of move on from it. But depending on based off of how much their expectations are going to color how they feel about it, if their expectations don't pan out, I think it might be important to make sure that the expectations are set appropriately so that they can understand if they're making content for YouTube, what ways they will be like the people that they look up to and what ways they will probably not be like the people they look up to on YouTube, as far as raking in the money and the getting tons of views, you know?
So that sounds like a little bit of advice for Dad, for Ian. So do you have any advice for his son?
Yeah, do the stuff that's exciting to you. I think there's a lot of really kind of cool, like I said before, like when you are trying to make content, there's a lot of stuff that you can kind of get excited about making, and I would say do the stuff that makes you excited. And if you don't have too many of those ideas, you know, go looking for them. And I think if he loves Lego and he's doing a Lego channel and that's what's fun, that's awesome. And I think whatever, like at the end of the day, if it's fun, that's what makes it worth it. And if it's exciting, then I think chase that. That's
that
really
was
cool.
One of the hardest parts for us, I think, after the first year or so, was coming up with ideas.
Yeah, and then we kind of settled into a more comfortable routine where now we can just talk for a really long time without really having any ideas. It's crazy how much you can say even when you've run out of things to say.
Yeah.
You just got to keep going.
All right, so that's cool. I'm glad. It's funny because maybe this is that empathy thing, because I took a look at the channel. It's actually kind of funny. Like I liked the way his son did a few things with the Lego characters and other guys that he added, and how there were parallels between. So there'd be like a couple of mummies and a couple of werewolves and the Abomination made an appearance. Do you know who the Abomination is? He's like some sort of like a, not a Hulk light, but sort of like the idea of a Hulk, where he was exposed to radiation and he became some sort of big green monster. No, but it was cool, and there's Ben 10 stuff there too.
Ooh, I liked Ben 10.
Yeah, so it clearly there was a joy there. I think. If anything, that's the most important part, for me at least.
That's awesome. So then I think doing the right thing.
Yeah. So I'm
on the right track.
And I'd love to hear more about what's happening as things change.
I love Ben 10. I should maybe, if people are interested, I think I have some screenshots in my phones from some really weird specific information from the Ben 10 wiki. That show got weird, and I don't know if it was when I was watching it or afterwards, but there was some really funky stuff in that wiki.
Okay. So
just really like I honestly can't tell if the wiki was just poorly phrased or if the show actually was that wild.
It was a pretty wild show.
Yeah. No, I remember a lot about it. I don't remember a lot of this because I'm gonna feel weird without being able to read it, but there was a character that was Ben 10 from an alternate universe where he was rich and loved shawarma.
Who doesn't love shawarma?
No, but like that was his thing or something like that. Like that was like he had a catchphrase like at shawarma time or something like that. Or I don't.
It's like the thing with hammering time.
No, sorry, it was Gyro. I think it was Gyro, where he's like, it's Gyro time, and he had like a catchphrase, and there's something about like how he cared more about popularity than saving the world, and once almost let his universe be destroyed because he had like a celebrity appearance or something like that. Like it was really weird. Like just the way that it was phrased was really kind of bizarre and strange. So maybe I'll pull those up for next time to do a dramatic reading of the Ben 10
I would
wiki.
love to hear that. I still remember how much that meant to you. That it was such a treat for you when we'd get like a Ben 10 action figure. Not that that's not uncommon for kids and stuff, but man, I still like that was a big part of your life.
I still have a decent number of relatively specific for the time of my life that it was memories of Ben 10 and like what the characters were named and stuff. And like I know I have like an Upchuck action figure somewhere in
Forearms
our home, probably the garage. there was Forearms, there was Upchuck, there was
Oh,
Accelerate.
we played a game with Ben 10 in it.
Yeah, PlayStation 2 game with Ben 10 in it, where it was like gearing up to like the big final fight with like Vilgax. I remember a surprising amount about Ben 10, so when I say that there was some really weird stuff in that wiki, I am not joking.
All right, so actually there was an actual factual question on Injustice there that I should probably address. So there's still some characters that have never had a breakthrough. And people talk about it like, well, maybe it should be that it could have been that they were the hidden breakthroughs, but it's not. Like, even including all the... When I talk about hidden breakthroughs, what I mean is the ones that aren't listed but that are still eligible. There's certain ones that have never been eligible as hidden or whatever, and it's just the way it's set up. There was maybe 2 gold seasons, or maybe like a few days where breakthroughs was available with no limitations, but they were not many. So, and some characters didn't exist. Like, for example, Deadshot didn't exist then, so Deadshot for sure can't be past 7. There's no Cyborg, there's no Nightwing, there's no Raven, there's been no Static, no Martian Manhunter, no Hawkgirl, maybe Doomsday? I'm not sure. I don't think so. Actually, maybe not Doomsday. Maybe he has been. I can't remember now off the top of my head. But there definitely haven't been. And I think it's the same issue. This is probably less of an issue than even the broken Survivor gears for Android. So I think if it's going to happen, it's going to take something big. I mean, there have been a few updates since the broken Survivor gears where it hasn't been fixed. So this is something that's a lot less visible than that problem. And so I'm thinking the visible problem is probably likely to be fixed earlier. Oh, and he mentioned Aquaman. Ian Donegan mentioned Aquaman.
Yeah. So this is a big question. We're talking about this one a lot, making up for all the time that we didn't spend at the beginning answering questions.
So apparently Aquaman is doing really well at the box office, and maybe the best DC Universe movie ever, like as far as money goes.
Yeah.
Getting decent reviews.
I have a review from my friend Alex, frequently mentioned on the show. He said it was pretty good, not worth going to the theater for.
See, that's not what I heard. I heard that
he would say if you're invested in DC, it would be worth going to the theater for. He's a comic book guy, but he was like, I wouldn't necessarily go to the theater unless you're specifically interested in watching it. Unless you're kind of sold on the theater, like the elevator pitch for one reason or another.
Okay. See, because here's the thing. Aquaman always used to get the short end of the stick. He always got the least amount of respect. He was a guy in the orange shirt and the green tights whose power was talking to fish. And so, okay, so maybe now I have another reason not to watch Aquaman in the theater, because I actually don't watch a lot of movies in the theater.
Me neither. Although we should watch Into the Spider-Verse.
I heard that was great.
Maybe not together, but just separately. I've heard nothing but incredible things about that.
So basically, any minor excuse is going to keep me out of theater, right? And for Aquaman, the thing that's keeping me out, I heard this really bad Jason Momoa story about how he was awful to Amber Heard.
From who?
No, it was Amber Heard did an interview, and she mentioned this, like, sort of joking, like, haha, he's so cute. But to me, it's like a total awful thing. So apparently Amber Heard, because of the special effects, had to be suspended from cables for hours at a time, in between shoots and stuff. They would keep her up because it was easier keeping her up than to take her down. So she would bring a book with her to read. And the special effects guys would even give her, made a green bag for her so that it wouldn't be visible when they were doing the green screen stuff. Yeah, so she'd read a book, and just a side note too, we are so spoiled by how easily available books are, because there used to be a time when books would only be copied out by hand. That's the only way you'd get books. That somebody had spent hours copying out and drawing the pictures and, hand making each and every single book. All right, but so what he did was he ripped out the pages. The last few pages of a book or books she was reading, and wouldn't tell her, and then she'd be stuck up there reading it, and then find out that the pages were gone while she's stuck up and couldn't do anything about it.
Oh, that's really rude.
And that was supposed to be a prank. Like, right now you can't see me doing this, the audience or you, but I'm doing air quotes, a prank.
Yeah, nobody
Right.
could see
I can
that.
see that. So
That's true. It's
so
for you.
she's stuck there. This is somehow funny. I mean, that's awful.
Yeah.
So, I mean, to me, that's what I associate with. So, all right. So, Spideyverse, Into the Spideyverse is on our list, and Spider-Verse.
Spidey.
And maybe Aquaman is not. Maybe when it's on Netflix or something then.
Okay, I think we are running very long, so we have a last question here, but maybe we'll have to push it and get to our outro sequence.
Okay, so why don't we do that?
Yeah. We should mention we've got a Patreon, patreon.com/BDCKR. But more important than that, we have patrons, and those people deserve our thanks. So this week we have the triumphant return. If you will follow me, I will lead you to iProphet in his jacket full of jokes. You know, when I visualize this, you know those people in movies on like a street corner.
Oh,
with, like,
they
the
open
big
with
jackets,
watches?
They open up full of like
Hey, you
products.
want to buy a watch?
Yeah, tons of different watches. Yeah. So you know, iProphet is here for us with only the finest quality of knockoff.
I don't even know they're
watches.
knockoff watches.
Are they not? Well, then why are they hiding them in the jacket?
I
What were
think
they?
sometimes they do it just to give you this veneer of illicitness to make it more attractive to people who think they're getting a deal.
Okay, well, this is full veneer of illicitness apply here because these are illegal jokes.
Okay.
For your ears only. So iProphet has this joke for us, which is, why was Aquaman angry with Aqualad?
I don't know. Why was Aquaman angry with Aqualad?
His grades were below sea level.
I like that.
So there we go. That's iProphet making use of his tier, but we got to give a huge thank you to Console Peasant, Eddy G, and Edwin Felix, who are supporting us at the highest last word tier, iProphet, who is supporting us at the Your Message Here tier, and Shawn, Farrell, and Daniel Simonson, who support us on the credited level. Thank you guys so much for your support, and thank you to all of you for watching. We'll see you next time. Komoda.